The story of Sallman'S painting, Jesus, the Children's Friend, was written by Sylvia E. Peterson and published in 1947. Down a dusty road which led through the villages of Perea, a little band of men were traveling on their way toward Jerusalem. Their journey took them across a section of the great fertile plain of Jordan Valley and over the winding paths which intertwined among the massive rolling hills that flanked these rich lands on the east. Young men they were, humble and unpretentious, and yet wherever they went, great crowds followed them. These throngs were made up of quite an array of individuals, young and old, well and sick, rich and poor, humble and proud, devout and impious, friend and foe. From near and from far they came, some merely out of curiosity, others because of a deep need. It was the leader of the band whom all sought. "We would see Jesus," was the cry of the hour. Attentively they listened as he spoke. What profound truths he presented, and yet what simple language he used. Out of their everyday experiences he chose effective illustrations for his teaching. How easily they understood him when he spoke about the flowers and of the birds, the wheat and the tares, the shepherd and the sheep. With amazement they watched him perform miracles. The sick were healed, the lame were made to walk, the blind received their sight. Unmindful of his own weariness, Jesus taught and ministered to all who sought him. And though Jesus the Christ was tremendously popular with the crowds and sincerely loved by many, there was a group of men who bitterly hated him. The Pharisees, blinded by jealousy, were constantly seeking to trap him, hoping to ensnare him with difficult questions. Critically, they watched him, hoping he would give a wrong judgment or a faulty decision by which they might accuse him and bring him to trial. And also during his stay in Perea, the Pharisees came unto him, tempting him, Matthew 19:3. But Jesus, maintaining his usual poise and sincerity, met the problem and gave answer in such a way that his enemies were forced to retire baffled. Following this encounter comes the beautiful story related by three of the gospel narrators. The story is depicted in this painting, Jesus, the Children's Friend, by artist Sallman. The sun is high overhead. The hills and the valleys lie basking in its warm rays, while above them snowy white clouds are sailing across a sea of blue. Nestled in the hillside is the sleepy little village. It is tucked away in the shelter of the great hills, many miles from the busy activity of the large metropolis. The road which runs below the village is one of the side roads leading to the main highway of caravan travel. There is no drowsiness in the village on the day of this scene. However, excitement prevails. A rumor has been circulating that the great teacher has been in neighboring villages and perhaps would come by their own little town. Over many a carpenter's bench the men are discussing the Nazarene. They feel a special kinship with him. Was he not a carpenter also? They had heard that he was still talking about yokes. "Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me," he said, "for I am meek and lowly in my heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Matthew 11:29 and 30. He was also speaking about builders of houses. In one of his sermons, he had spoken of a wise man who built a house with the foundations dug deep into the rock. And because of the secure foundation, the house stood unshaken when the heavy storms came. And this man he likened to the person who heard his sayings and kept them. But the man who heard them and did not keep them was likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Matthew 7:24-27. The women gathered at the well linger much longer than usual. Small talk is forgotten. Instead, they vie with one another in recalling the oft-told stories about the man from Nazareth. His teachings and his miracles are beyond anything heretofore heard or seen. There is something else, however, that strikes a more responsive chord in the hearts of these peasant women of Perea, who know little else than servitude and drudgery. It is the fact that this great teacher has the reputation of being a defender of womanhood and a lover of little children. Little wonder that they long for an opportunity to see Jesus. No doubt more than one mother secretly hoped that her little one could receive the Master's blessing. The stories of Jesus have not reached adult ears alone. His name is a household word, and the children too are familiar with it. Perhaps they have often sought to paint word pictures of this wonderful person who to them has become a great hero. What a thrill it will be, they think, if we can only get to see Jesus. Isolated as these Perean villagers are, they are not out of reach of the Master. He must needs go that way, for he knows where needy lives and longing hearts are to be found, even today. Before Jesus and his disciples reach the crest of the hill, eager mothers with little children in their arms and with happy boys and girls, skipping excitedly alongside, hasten from their homes to greet him. One little golden-haired girl arrives ahead of the others, and there seems to be no doubt in her mind which one of the men is Jesus. The man in the white garment, from whose face glows tenderness and love, must be the kind teacher about whom she had heard. His welcoming smile is all she needs, and to the amazement of the disciples, she rushes past them and flings herself into the Master's tender embrace. I had to stop for a moment there from reading this because, we're supposed to come to him like little children. And there have been so many times that I've felt his embrace. So many times where I was in great need, like a lost little child. And he was always there. But back to the reading. By this time, the hillside seems to be teeming with mothers and children. The disciples look at one another with astonishment and then at the intruders of indignation. More important, people need his attention. Why should he needlessly be troubled by some mere women and children? Furthermore, they want no interruption in their deep and personal discourses. With disgust, they turn to the women and rebuke them, Matthew 19:13, and two of the disciples attempt to hold back the group. The one to the left must be Peter, impetuous, impulsive Peter, always ready to jump to the defense of his Master, and in the foreground to the right is John, perhaps. He, too, is one of the inner circle disciples. The little boy with the striped tunic and the red cap seems to disregard the detaining disciples in his eagerness to get to Jesus. The mother to the left keeps her eye on John as she urges her little blue-hooded daughter forward, while the woman in the right foreground draws her little child into a close, protecting embrace. The mother at the far right seems unmindful of the disciples' rebuke. She is pressed close to Christ and is lifting up her little one to him. And while the baby, responsive to Jesus' winsome personality, stretches out his little arms in anticipation. Silently, Jesus is watching his disciples, and he hears their rebuke and how disappointed he is in them. Often he has endeavored to teach them the value of the child. Has he not warned them that, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 18:3? Has he not urged them to be considerate of the children? Not many days earlier he had said to them, "Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you, that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven," Matthew 18:10. And how slow they were to learn. Tenderly, Jesus lifts the little golden-haired girl and places her on a rocky ledge. Sensing the sharp edge of the disciples' rebuke, the little girl snuggles more closely into the embrace of the Master. There she feels safe as she lays her curly little head upon his breast and clutches his garment with her left hand, while from under long lashes her dark eyes look confidently out upon the bewildered group. Stretching forth his arm in a gesture to halt his disciples, he commands in a voice which is stern and yet tender, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God," Mark 10:14. Astonished, the disciples stopped abruptly to look at him, and before they can question him, Jesus repeats a warning so sorely needed. "Whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall not enter therein," Mark 10:15. As the delighted mothers and happy children press close to Jesus, the rebuffed disciples are forced to withdraw to the sidelines. He takes the little children into his arms and blesses them. The older boys and girls crowd about his knees as they wait their turn to feel his tender hand upon their heads, and to hear his sweet voice pronounce upon them a benediction. And while they watch him with worshipful eyes, they, as all normal children, would eagerly ply him with one question, or with questions. And no doubt the disciples look at one another questioningly. Certainly Jesus would not stop to answer these childish questions when there are people waiting to confer with him on important issues. But Jesus does. He knows the importance of rightly answering questions and solving problems, even for the youngest child, and he wants to teach his followers this same truth. When this impressive incident was over, we are told by Matthew that Jesus departed thence. The road ahead led to Jerusalem, where suffering and death awaited him. Perhaps as he faced the ordeal, he was often encouraged and heartened by the memory of these precious little children. Their sweet personalities, their simple faith, their implicit trust, their potentialities for good shone like bright lights along a very dark path. He looked to them to further the program of his great kingdom, but as yet they were only children in need of care, of instruction, of guidance. His thoughts returned to them again one morning after his resurrection, when he stood on the shores of the Sea of Galilee and urged his disciple Peter to feed my lambs, John 21:15. When the sun set on the little Perean village that particular evening, there must have rested over every home a deep sense of peace and joy. Brief though Jesus' visit had been, it had left a fragrance that lingered down through the years, even till today. And we wonder what became of the children whom Jesus blessed. Perhaps if we could hear their story, we would find that the impact of Jesus' visit was far-reaching in its results. Is it amiss to believe that many a boy or girl entered into the kingdom about which the Master had spoken, and when grown to manhood and womanhood, joined the ranks of the early Christian church? Very likely many of them were called upon to go through severe testings, sufferings, persecutions, and perhaps even martyrdom for the sake of the gospel. But it is just as probable that they continued undaunted in their faith as they sensed the presence of him who walked the Perean road one day long ago, and had come to their friend when he said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God."